right, everybody. We've been waiting for this. I have been looking forward to speaking with our next guest for a while now. And today we are speaking with the best-selling international author, Graham Hancock, who's coming to us from England. And hey, Graham, how are you? Good to see you.
Hi, Cliff. I'm in good shape. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, I'm going to ask you real quickly before we begin. Everybody's had issues with the pandemic. This must have curtailed your travel, obviously, but
well, let's put it another way. It's made travel more complicated and certainly more bureaucratic.
Mhm.
It hasn't made it impossible, but it's made it much more of a challenge than it used to be. In a way, this isn't a bad lesson actually, because we've all come to take free and easy travel, all over the world for granted, and to suddenly have all of that very strictly limited and to have to be answerable to all kinds of bureaucrats along the way is quite a strange and disturbing experience of what an even more dystopian world could look like, actually.
It seems like every month there's a new report of another variant, and we just got word here in the United States of a version of Omicron, which is now devastating Los Angeles. And I mean, when does it end is the question.
I don't know. And there's so many mixed messages around the whole thing. It's really an exercise in mass confusion, which is going on at the moment. And it certainly has made things a lot more complicated, but by and large, I've managed to get in a fair amount of research travel over the last couple of years.
Perfect. Well, I have a lot to talk to you about. We haven't talked in a while, and we've had some very interesting people on the program talking about our planet. And one of the most interesting fellows is the guy I'm sure you know about, which is Dr. Avi Loeb of the Harvard University, the astronomer who has
wrote this book, Extraterrestrial, about the Umama object.
The Umama object, the object that he has reclassified as a monument. Which is quite fascinating. But one of the things he's
very daring to step out there and put his reputation on the line saying that. But good for him. We need minds like that at work on problems.
He's wonderful. And the other thing, and I don't know if you know this or not, he refused to sign a Pentagon paper, a non-disclosure paper, if he finds something artificial or alien. And this is unusual because most of these heavy hitters like him sign an NDA specifying they will not reveal certain images, certain data to the general public. He's all about being transparent, which is very unusual.
We need more scientists like that. There's no excuse for lack of transparency. We're all the human race and the human public, and we all contribute to the costs of these kind of researches and adventures. And it's ridiculous that the bureaucrats sitting in capital cities should make decisions on behalf of the rest of us. We all have a right to know. There's way too much bureaucratic control in the world today. It's getting out of hand, and the bureaucrats forget that they serve us. They don't own us. They don't rule us. They don't have any right to control us.
One of the things that I found was quite insightful is that he has recalibrated the satellite array to be able to spot what he calls these alien or ET monuments, which is what the object that he found previous to that. So one of the things he does is he reclassifies observing other planets, and he calls them technical signatures. This can be carbon in the atmosphere. It can be these monuments, evidence of civilizations, lights. Of course, the new reclassification of UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. But when it comes to our planet, what are the technical signatures of the pre-Diluvian people that you think? In other words,
well, see, this is an issue which actually crosses both of these domains. Whether we're looking out into outer space and trying to identify civilizations out there, or whether we're looking back in time into the past of life on Earth and trying to identify civilizations, I think the mistake we're making is that we're constantly trying to look for ourselves. We're constantly trying to look for a civilization like ours. We're making assumptions about what a civilization would need in order to be a civilization. And those assumptions are rooted and grounded in what our own civilization is and was and has become. And we find it very difficult to think outside the box, to think of other types of civilization that might do technology in a completely different way, that might be much less concerned with issues of mechanical advantage that we're interested in, that might be tapping into the powers of the mind much more effectively than our own mechanistic civilization is doing. So the first mistake is assuming that something like us is out there and looking for it. I think we should not draw any boundaries around what a civilization is or could be. We shouldn't say, well, if we don't find carbon in the atmosphere, then there's no sign of a civilization. We have to be much more open-minded than that.
What would you say if we were to
look at the past? Sorry, Cliff. That's true of the past. In looking for a civilization of the past, in terms of the human past, there are two issues. Firstly, actually many more than two issues, but let's name two of them. Firstly, we cannot know that a civilization of the past would be exactly like ours or would go down the same technological route as ours would do. And secondly, the geological processes on planet Earth have a way of wiping things clean relatively quickly. I mean, just because I'm living in England, it's an old country, but frankly speaking, we have hardly anything left even from the Tudor period, which is 500 years ago or less. 400 years ago. We have hardly anything left from that period. Never mind from periods in the much more distant past, the much more remote past, when we're left with just sort of scraps and tiny pieces on which to draw our assumptions. And the same goes for interstellar space, those vast distances and those vast time spans involved. Anything we're seeing, that's 1,000 light years away. It's taken 1,000 years for that light to reach us. So, it's an enormously complicated problem, but it starts with the assumption of what we're looking for. And all I want to say is we should not assume that what we're going to find is going to be us. We're going to find something very different, which may do things in a very different way, so different that it would completely blow our minds and we couldn't even get to grips with its technology. We couldn't even recognize it as a technology.
That's my thinking as well, is that for all we know, these pre-Diluvian people developed unique science and physics, that were able to probably use what looks like Earth energies. You write a great deal about places like Baalbek, Egypt, and Peru, these megalithic stones. What are the signatures other than the cut marks that would take us to a science that we're not familiar with? What would be, for you, beyond just the basics of the stone monuments, would you say is
almost by definition a science that we're not familiar with would not we would not have any markers for it, for what it might be? Let's say that our lost civilization or our aliens thousands of light years away are masters of telepathy and telekinesis. How are we going to find the physical evidence for that, either in the past or in distant interstellar space? It's a very difficult, it's a very challenging problem to find that physical evidence. So when I look at the past, I am not in a desperate search for technology like ours. What I am in a search for is knowledge. Do I find evidence from the past of a level of knowledge possessed by some human beings which was far in advance of the knowledge that our historians and archaeologists tell us was available at that time? That's what I regard as an anomaly or a puzzle, which requires further investigation. That's why, for example, I'm interested in ancient maps that have survived and been copied and recopied down the ages, which include very accurate relative longitudes. Longitude is a technological problem. Solving longitude requires an accurate chronometer that can keep accurate time at sea. And our civilization didn't do that until the second half of the 18th century. So when we find maps that go back to the 15th or 14th century, which we know were copied from even older source maps now lost, which include precise relative longitudes, then we have a problem. And the problem gets even bigger when those maps show the world as it looked during the last ice age. and it gets bigger still when those maps show continents such as Antarctica, which our civilization didn't discover until the 19th century. All of these things raise questions in my mind. I don't impose a notion of what a lost civilization might have been. I don't want to do that. I want to let the evidence speak to me. And the evidence says to me, there is a big hole in our understanding of the past. There are too many anomalies to be dismissed as mere coincidence. We're looking at a legacy of knowledge and wisdom that's been passed down over a very long period of time.
Yeah, you're referring to the Perry-Reese map, which is the one I know
Well,
about.
Yeah, that's just one of a category of maps.
Yeah.
Perry-Reese map is extremely interesting, drawn by a Turkish admiral in 1513. We're fortunate that he made handwritten notes on the map. Mm-hmm. Not all of the map has survived. Actually, only a fragment of it has survived. It was originally a world map, but the fragment that survives shows the west coast of Africa and the east coast of the Americas. And this map was drawn in 1513, and that was just 21 years after Columbus famously sailed the ocean blue in 1492.
Yeah.
And the map has a number of anomalous features. One is it arguably shows the Antarctic coastline down at the tip of South America. And another is that it shows the Bimini Road on a huge island in the place where the island of Bimini now sits. And the last time that structure was above water, it's now 20 feet underwater. The last time it was above water was more than 7,000 years ago, and it was above water for thousands of years before that. So, Perry-Reese, the Antarctica aspect of Perry-Reese swings into focus when we realize that there are dozens of other maps from that period which also show Antarctica. And yet you can go to maps created with the best technology in the early 19th century, such as the Pinkerton world map, and you'll find only a hole where Antarctica is. There's no land mass shown there at all because we didn't discover it until 1820, and those were honest cartographers. And yet there it is on much older maps, copied from even older source maps, in the right place, of the right scale and size, many details correct. It's a very puzzling thing, and I think these puzzles, I think research should be anomaly driven. We should be driven by things that aren't explained by the current theory. One of the problems I have with archaeology is that they want to make everything fit into the current theory.
Right.
Here's the current theory. We want to make everything fit with it. If it doesn't fit, we might actually not even speak about it. This is how archaeology unfortunately works, that they'll dismiss whole topics, the way the notion of Clovis first in the peopling of the Americas, that the Clovis culture was the first culture, the way that had a stranglehold on American archaeology for decades, even though there was masses of evidence which showed that Clovis was definitely not first. I think that rather than trying to force puzzling and difficult evidence to fit into the straitjacket of existing theory, we should be willing to reconsider existing theory much more than we are at present.
In your last book, you outlined and showed us a great deal of the Amazon area. And you actually found something that has actually come up recently more with some other people who were down where you were, which is this astronomical aligned kind of a mini Stonehenge.
Yeah.
That was amazing to see that, but that's another signature right there. I mean, we were so used to Stonehenge and there's circles around the world in different places, but when they're coming up and you're revealing them, isn't that something we should be looking a little closer at?
Oh, I think the Amazon is one of those huge holes in our knowledge of the past, and that's why I devoted a big chunk of my last book, which was America Before, that was published in 2019. I devoted a big chunk of that to the Amazon. When I look at the issue of a lost civilization, I have to ask myself, where are archaeologists looking today, and where are they not looking? And by and large, where archaeologists are looking today are the places in which people live today. They are not looking at places which may be very difficult today, but were extremely nurturing and positive environments thousands of years ago. And the Sahara Desert is one of those areas, green during the Ice Age, virtually uninhabitable today. The Amazon is one of those areas. It's suddenly, I mean, it's a very old rainforest, but it's something very strange started to happen to it about 12,000 years ago, when it started to be effectively gardened and managed by human beings. And we see this in the hyperdominance of trees that produce food products, such as Brazil nut trees, for example. This rainforest was turned into a huge resource for humanity. And this began more than 12,000 years ago. And while modern archaeology has tended to be captivated by the notion that the Amazon is an untamed rainforest, in fact, it's largely a man-made environment. And we have to go back. We have to go back to the beginnings of that man-made environment more than 12,000 years ago and consider what the Amazon looked like then. And it's just one of those tragic facts that the clearances of the Amazon that are now taking place because of the greed and stupidity of the international community. Let me address that point for a moment. When I say the greed and stupidity of the international community, I think everybody would agree that the Amazon rainforest is a precious resource for all of humanity. It's a precious resource. And at the same time, we should all also be aware that there's an enormous amount of poverty in a country like Brazil. And it's that poverty which is driving ordinary Brazilians, poverty-stricken Brazilians, to migrate out into the rainforest and to cut down the rainforest and to plant soybean farms there. Soybeans are then grown to feed cattle so that we can all eat hamburgers. This is an incredibly bad idea. If the international community really valued the Amazon, what we should be doing is to collecting together the resources to compensate the peoples of the Amazonian countries, to compensate them adequately and fully so that it's not in their interests to cut down the forest anymore, so that actually it makes economic sense for them to keep the forest alive. And because the forest is a benefit to all of humanity, it's up to all of humanity to get together and make sure that forest is preserved. And that's not going to be done by blaming the poor. That's going to be done by giving the poor an investment in keeping those forests alive. And we have the resources to do that. We just lack the will and the dynamic drive in order to make something like that happen. We can spend billions, trillions of dollars on all of the most horrific forms of warfare and weapons of mass destruction and accumulating gigantic arsenals to threaten one another with, but we seem incapable as an international community of just putting together the funds to compensate the peoples of the Amazon to carry on gardening that rainforest rather than destroying it.
Yeah, I think we're ignorant of the importance of the Amazon. I think someone said that the Amazon represents the lungs of our planet. And produces our oxygen.
And biodiversity, Cliff, as well. I mean, a home of incredible biodiversity. The destruction of the Amazon, we lose an enormous percentage of the biodiversity on this planet, and that's a very dangerous place to get ourselves into. It's just madness that this is being allowed to happen. And then, tantalizingly, these clearances, which should never be happening, well, what they have done is that they've revealed that there are enormous structures in the Amazon. They've revealed that explorers' stories of giant cities in the Amazon, which were treated as lies for hundreds of years, that those stories turn out to be true, that there were enormous cities in the Amazon. The peoples of the Amazon were not just simple hunter-gatherers. They were gardening an enormous resource and creating a very viable lifestyle out of that enormous resource, which was destroyed by the Western invasion of the Amazon, and largely by bringing in diseases like smallpox, to which there was no local resistance. So this was a thriving ecosystem which supported millions of people, and it could be again, but we have to make the right choices. So there's these very large geoglyphs, is the best way to call them, a bit like the Nazca lines, except that they're earthworks. They have raised banks on an enormous scale. Hundreds and hundreds of square meters are covered by these structures. They're often cardinally aligned, perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west. They have solstitial and equinoctial alignments as well. They have incredible geometry. There were master geometers working in the Amazon thousands of years ago, and we're just beginning to become aware of this. And what does this mean for our story of our own past? We haven't taken the Amazon story into account in the story of civilization. We've just ignored it until now, until those clearances force us to reckon with the fact that there were people living in that rainforest thousands of years ago who were true scientists. Look at the creation of medicines like ayahuasca, the ayahuasca brew, and the number of the fact that it has to be made from two different plants, neither of which is psychoactive on its own. You know, to actually, so that's science. To put those together, curare, you know, in 11 different ingredients, that's science. The Amazon was a home of science thousands of years ago, and we've just ignored it completely until today. You know, we don't need to do any more clearances of the rainforest. We have the LIDAR technology now to see what's under the rainforest. And again, very little is being spent on that. A few archaeologists, and I've been in touch with them, are working in the Brazilian state of Acre with minimal LIDAR, but they don't have the funding because all the big money in archaeology goes to other things. I would say putting money into a serious archaeological investigation of the Amazon, starting with complete LIDAR survey of the most interesting regions, would be a really good place to begin. Because what LIDAR shows us is what is under the canopy without actually destroying the canopy. And I think that the discoveries in the Amazon over the coming 20 years are going to radically change our understanding of the past of humanity. Same goes for the Sahara Desert. Same goes for the continental shelves that were all submerged at the end of the last ice age.
I think LIDAR is overwhelming the archaeological community because it reveals so much. This, as an example, in Mexico, they found 500 what they call platforms and very, very old pre-Maya, pre-classic Maya foundations that they cannot account for. There's no record of them, and there's a type of structure that is a real question mark. It's just amazing. So
so this is why I have a problem with archaeologists who take the line that they've got the past all sorted out, you know, that it's just a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and filling in the details, that they've basically got they haven't got the big picture at all. They've got a tiny fraction of the picture. Archaeologists are drawing conclusions about the past of humanity while discounting enormous areas that were once heavily populated, like the Amazon, like the Sahara Desert, like the continental shelves. We can't be drawing conclusions about our past when we haven't done the work. And at the moment, archaeology has not done the work.
I want to talk to you about some work that Dr. Mark Carlotto has been doing. We go back to Charles Hapgood's theory on Earth's crustal displacement. And his work is showing that when you line up very old buildings, be it in Mexico at Chichen Itza, the Great Pyramid of Giza, South America, Cusco, and you align it with the current North Pole, you get one bit of data. But if you actually look at it from a displacement theory, it's significantly older. These places are very, very old. Is this valid for you? Does this feel like it's something that's going to be valid, or what?
I think that the whole Earth crust displacement theory, which Charles Hapgood was the first major advocate of, definitely deserves a second look. It deserves a much closer look than it's had. Of course, I paid a lot of attention to that theory in Fingerprints of the Gods back in 1995 when Fingerprints was published, that the evidence of a global cataclysm somewhere around 12,500 years ago was then and is still today, in my view, utterly overwhelming. And the question is what caused that cataclysm? Now, in recent years, there has been a growing body of evidence which suggests that implicated in the cataclysm was a fragmenting giant comet, and we were hit by a swarm of comet fragments. Comet impact and Earth crust displacement, it turns out, are not mutually exclusive. There's an excellent Italian scientist, a former admiral called Flavio Barbiero. He's written an article about this from my website. He's also written a book about why Antarctica could be the home of a lost civilization. And it's entirely about Earth crust displacement, but he's bringing a whole lot of new science to Charles Hapgood's idea, because the problem with Charles Hapgood's idea was, what is the irregular buildup of ice at the poles, is that enough to set the crust in motion? And in Barbiero's calculations, it isn't. But if you get an impact, a hefty impact on the surface of the planet that hits the planet, a glancing blow, not a direct impact, but a glancing blow that adds to the torque and spin on the planet, then you could indeed get Earth crust displacement as a result of comet impact. So I think the evidence in favor of Earth crust displacement, much derided though it has been over the last 20 years, has grown rather than shrunk. And I think we're looking at a very complicated series of events that preceded and took place during the geological episode known as the Younger Dryas, between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. And we cannot rule out that significant shifts of the Earth's crust was part of that. Maybe not the whole story, but part of it. I think the comet impact evidence is incredibly strong. It's the strongest evidence we have right now for a global cataclysm in the 12,500 years ago window. It's very powerful evidence. And although it has its critics, it is not going to be refuted. This evidence for what is called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is, I'm very, very, very familiar with it. And it is powerful, compelling, and overwhelming evidence. But the fact that there was a comet impact does not rule out that a side effect of that was a displacement of the crust of the Earth as well. And Flavio Barbiero's work really addresses itself to that point.
It's still not a mainstream. It's still not a mainstream topic at all because it happened so long ago.
You want to get the mainstream to run a mile, just mention Earth crust displacement to them.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, they'll take off at high speed, showing you their heels. I mean, to put it simply, the notion is that the crust of the Earth, the lithosphere, is to be compared with something like the thick skin of an orange, or rather the relatively thin skin of an orange by comparison with the meat of an orange. And that from time to time, while the meat stays in one place, the skin can revolve around the central core of the orange. And that's the notion with Earth crust displacement, that forces are unleashed which allow the crust of the Earth to slip, taking land that was at a pole, at the North Pole or the South Pole, and shifting it rather rapidly into much warmer latitudes, and conversely taking land that was in warmer latitudes and shifting it very rapidly into much colder latitudes. It's a very attractive theory in many ways. It explains a lot, but it also has serious problems. And I think the combination of that theory with the comet impact work that is now being done may help to solve those problems.
I hear from Mark. Mark wrote a book called Before Atlantis, and he has recalculated the dates for places like Chichen Itza to 80,000 years ago. I think Peru is 100,000 years for its inception date. And of course, Giza is around the same time when you align these. Yeah.
I just wouldn't rush to go that far back. I wouldn't rush to do it. Well, first of all, if we're going to say that Chichen Itza is 80,000 years old, we must say that only the idea of Chichen Itza is 80,000 years old, because the structures that stand at Chichen Itza are certainly not 80,000 years old. No way on God's earth are they 80,000 years old. The dating of those structures is relatively secure, and you're not going to find structures that are much older than 1,200 years old or less. So what we can say is that perhaps the idea of Chichen Itza, perhaps it was a sacred site for thousands of years before that. Perhaps there were earlier structures that stood there.
Yeah.
If so, those who advocate that should do their best to bring forward evidence of the existence of those earlier structures. Perhaps there was a sacred cavern. You and I are both familiar with the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. And the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan stands atop of a natural cave system, which has been elaborated and modeled by human beings. Now, the orientation of that cave system is such that it defines the orientation of the Pyramid of the Sun. Clearly, the cave system preceded the construction of the Pyramid of the Sun, and the modification of the cave system into a sort of cloverleaf shape directly beneath the apex of the Pyramid of the Sun is all the work of human beings. So the question is, was the idea for Teotihuacan present long before the pyramids as we now see them in their present incarnation were built. And you could ask that same question about Chichen Itza. But I think trying to push it back 80,000 years is a bridge too far. I'd love to see the evidence that would persuade me of that, but I don't see it. I find that even arguing for a civilization that was destroyed 12,000 years ago is a pretty heavy lift with the archaeological establishment. And we need to, we need to get the different sides in this debate, try to find some common ground, and getting to some sensible conclusions. So I've got nothing against the 80,000 years. I just don't see evidence for it.
Okay. Well, hey, look, you yourself have written that, I mean, you've dove off of Japan's ocean and went to Yonaguni. I think you went to
200 dives at Yonaguni, Cliff.
What?
200 dives at Yonaguni I've done.
200?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
I do take my research quite seriously.
I didn't know that, but you've also
7 years of scuba diving, trying to in doing the background research for my book Underworld, which looks.
I didn't know you did. That's a tremendous. That's
yeah. I love scuba diving. It's a wonder, just as well that I do. It's a wonderful thing to do. That's when you discover that the ancients were correct when they said the sea is a god, or rather a goddess. The sea can be incredibly loving and gentle and nurturing and kind, and it can also be ferocious and devastatingly powerful. And the one thing you learn as a diver is never fight the sea. Wow. Always go where the sea wants to take you. Because
were you dragging
on the same scale?
You're not going to tell me that Santha, your wife, dove with you 200 times.
Yes, Santha and I do everything.
God.
Santha did all those dives, and she did all the underwater photography on those dives.
Well, that's amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great period of our lives. We were diving mainly in the 1990s through into the early 2000s. Well, 20 years have passed. Some of those dives would probably be beyond my physical abilities now.
Right. The reason
I just say this, Yonaguni, which I'm quite certain is a man-made structure, the complication comes because it's carved out of natural bedrock. It's cut. There are bits of it that are actually built where megaliths are placed one on top of another, and when you do 200 dives, you find those bits. But most of it is cut from the natural rock, and that's the argument that is used by skeptics to say the whole thing is natural. But look, the Great Sphinx of Giza is carved from natural rock as well. But nobody's arguing that it's natural. The carving was done by human beings, and it's the same at Yonaguni. Diving at Yonaguni can be like diving in a river flowing at high speed. The currents there are so strong.
Really?
And then sometimes they'll drop to nothing in a few seconds, and you're in still, beautiful, clear water. It's a magical, majestic place. I'm very privileged to have had the opportunity to spend so much time there.
I'm bringing up Yonaguni and also Dwarka because you actually, I think you dove there too.
Dived at Dwarka, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Up in Gujarat, very interesting site.
What are we missing by not doing more underwater archaeology? It seems to me that this could be a real key to understanding our past. If, as you suggest in your books, the sea rose between 400 and 600 feet, that's a significant amount.
Let's say 400 feet.
400
feet. The
sea
sea level rise at the end of the ice age was 400 feet. And what are we missing? We're missing 10 million square miles of the Earth's surface that was above water during the ice age, and that's underwater now. To put that in perspective, that's roughly Europe and China added together. So it's like telling the story of the world, but ignoring Europe and China. That's what archaeology is doing by ignoring the continental shelves. Yes, there's some marine archaeology. Yes, they go diving and look at shipwrecks. But by and large, they're not interested in diving to see if the whole picture of our past needs to be revised, as I strongly believe it does. And if archaeologists would listen more to what local divers and local fishermen have to say, they would realize that there are anomalous structures all over the world on these continental shelves.
What was some of the dates for some of the artifacts pulled out of Dwarka? Weren't they in the thousands of, or at least 500 BC, something very, very remote?
That's right. I mean, Dwarka is a relatively shallow dive. I don't remember needing to get deeper than about 25 or 30 feet at Dwarka, whereas at Yonaguni you're down in the 120 foot range. It's a relatively shallow dive. Some of the submergence may be accounted for by land subsidence rather than by sea level rise. I think that more work needs to be done further out from the shore. than has been done at the moment. I think that Dwarka needs to be seen in context of the Indus Valley civilization, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, and the mysterious origins of that civilization. We're missing a huge part of the story from India. All the coastlines of India, Dwarka's up in the northwest, but down in the southeast, you have Mahabalipuram and you have Pumpahar. You have the fact that India was joined to Sri Lanka during the Ice Age, that the landmass extended south almost as far as the Maldives. And there are huge traditions in India about a lost land called Kumari Kandam. In many ways, it is the Indian Atlantis. And Kumari Kandam is described very accurately as a landmass that extended south from the southern tip of India, but that was submerged when the seas became angry and swallowed it up.
Yeah,
and that's a story that's found all over the world. Again, archaeologists are very dismissive of myths. But what are we to do with this global tradition of a flood that we find everywhere in virtually every culture all around the world, and of a few survivors who put together the seeds that will be necessary to restore life after the cataclysm? Why is this story told again and again? It's not enough to dismiss it as some kind of fantasy or coincidence. Of course, the myths are the memories our species has from a time when no written records have survived.
I mean, it feels like there's a problem with Western archaeology. They don't really look at the Chinese ancient history. They don't look at Indian
Absolutely.
or Hindu history. And in India, they have thousands of these very, very old temples that have information in them that we just don't, we get trickles of this data.
And something else very special about India, you have a living tradition, which is carrying down ideas from the remotest past and bringing them into the modern world. This is where India is very different from, say, Egypt, because when you go to Egypt and you see the ruins, the majestic, magical ruins of ancient Egypt all around you, the connection to the tradition of ancient Egypt has been severed. And we are only able to access that tradition through Egyptological interpretations of ancient Egyptian texts. Whereas in the case of India, the connection has not been severed. And that's why you don't find a lot of very, very, very old temples in India, because when you have a continuous tradition, well, they continuously rebuild and renovate temples. They don't just leave them there to, fade away. They keep on redeveloping them and building temples on the same spot. And we see examples of that in many other places. We talked about Chichen Itza. You and I both know that Chichen Itza, the Kukulkan pyramid, is built on top of another pyramid, and that you can actually get inside and see that inner pyramid with its inner shrine. And that the case of Cholula in Mexico, there's at least 6 pyramids built one on top of the other there. So this is why I think it's important to hang on to the notion that the antiquity of ideas is as important as the antiquity of the artifacts and architecture to which those ideas are attached.
Fascinating. I would love to hear about your feeling on these different hominins that are popping up around the world. We have the Denisovan, which is, some people think those are the former Atlanteans or pre-Diluvian people. We have different hominins popping up around our planet. What is going on? It's like massive panspermia on a global scale. It's crazy.
Well, it's certainly causing us to rethink the story of our past. Santa and I were very, very privileged to get to Denisova Cave in the south of Siberia. We made a massive overland journey across Russia in order to get there back in 2017. It is a very, very special place. Look, what's changed, and it's really all changed since 2010, when the Neanderthal genome was fully decoded and published. That's when we began to get to grips with the notion that anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. And we now know that the majority of human populations have up to 4% of Neanderthal DNA in their DNA. That's when we started to ask ourselves more questions about the Neanderthals. Previously, the Neanderthals had been thought to be, they were stereotyped as this ignorant, savage brutes, but they were interbreeding with our ancestors. Maybe they weren't so ignorant or savage if they were deemed acceptable as mates. And then we find that actually the Neanderthals were doing art that there are cave paintings left behind by the Neanderthals, which are tens of thousands of years older than the cave paintings left by anatomically modern humans. It's beginning to look like the Neanderthals were the smart ones, and that they taught anatomically modern humans how to paint. That skill looks like it was transferred from Neanderthals to anatomically modern humans, not the other way around. And in a sense, even talking about anatomically modern humans is unnecessary, because Neanderthals survive within us. We are all Neanderthals. Then you have the Denisovans, they're named after that cave in Siberia where a monk called Denis used to meditate. That's why they're called the Denisovans. And it turns out that they are related to Neanderthals and to anatomically modern humans, and that there was interbreeding going on between all of these groups, between anatomically modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. Furthermore, the Denisovans left behind artifacts that seem to be tens of thousands of years ahead of their time, that anatomically modern humans weren't making until 20,000 years later. So we're just at the tip of an enormous mystery of uncovering the truth about the past. And this is why I like to use the phrase, stuff just keeps on getting older, because it just keeps on getting older. And every time it gets older, look, we now have the earliest anatomically modern human skulls going back more than 300,000 years from Morocco, and certainly close to 250,000 years from Ethiopia. We know that Neanderthals and Denisovans were around for hundreds of thousands of years before that. These were symbolic species, just like ourselves. They were capable of doing everything that we can do. Why it's interesting that stuff just keeps on getting older is that it opens up that window wider and wider for missing elements of the human story. And I am convinced we are a species with amnesia, and that this very long span of time that precedes the so-called origins of civilization, the longer it gets, the more difficult it comes to believe that civilization just began suddenly 6,000 years ago. No, it's got much, much more ancient origins than that. And those origins may not be confined entirely to anatomically modern humans at all.
Do you think that the Hindu Yugas are valid at all, which takes civilization hundreds of thousands of years in the past and shows a high point and then proceeding to a low point and then resurrecting back to the high point again?
Well, in a sense, I think that investigation is for my next life.
Okay.
Have enough to deal with in this life, persuading the archaeological establishment that there may be a major forgotten episode in the human story about 12,000 years ago.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes to the fact.
Let me just finish this point.
Yeah.
What I do really value in the Indian traditions is the notion of this cyclical notion that what goes up must come down, that what goes around comes around, that we're locked in a series of cycles, and the exact number of years for those cycles, in my mind, remains to be settled. I'm not against the hundreds of thousands of years. Now that we know that anatomically modern humans have been around for 250,000 years, there's no reason why civilization shouldn't have been around for much longer than that as well. But I have to stay focused on my immediate target. And my immediate target is to keep on drilling down and presenting the evidence that something major is missing from our story, and that major something came to an end about 12,500 years ago. And when it began is a whole other story. That's a whole other story, and I don't even try to go there. I'm interested in showing that there's something major missing, that there's evidence from the past that cannot be explained in terms of our understanding of human capabilities at that time. And I can't even remember what B is.
Well, I mean, I kind of use the Yugas in a way to preface the thought of what did these pre-Diluvian, these pre-flood people look like? What type of,
like us?
You think they did?
Yeah, by and large, I think the human form hasn't changed much in the last 250,000 years. The Jebel Irhoud fossils from Morocco are slightly more dubious, but the recent redating of the Omo fossils from Ethiopia to about 240,000 years ago is really firm. So they look like us.
Okay.
They look like they were anatomically modern humans. Coexisting with them in the world were other humans who didn't look like us, with big brow ridges and receding chins and enormous musculature. the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, who may also have been very big, physically big individuals. The Neanderthals, let's remember, had been the masters of Europe for 200,000 years before anatomically modern humans showed up amongst them. So a little bit different, but the change of human appearance has been relatively slow over the last 200,000. It's not changed radically. We can recognize ourselves in these fossils from a quarter of a million years ago.
Okay. Would it be your best hope to find a new Mayan codice, an Egyptian book of the or some language about the past, or are you picking up bits and pieces from civilizations that have long gone, like the Sumerian cuneiforms or whatever?
Right.
I mean, what is it for you in your search? Is it a constant breadcrumb trail or what?
It's a constant breadcrumb trail, and what I'm trying to do is to provide a solid, reasoned, thoroughly researched alternative to the mainstream narrative. There's no point in tackling the mainstream narrative of the past if we do so in a slight or fanciful way. We have to do so in a thorough and detailed manner, using their own weapons against them. And that's my project, is to look for those anomalies in the past and to consider what they might mean. More and more in recent years, it's been focused on this issue of the cataclysm that occurred during the Younger Dryas between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. That was a huge punctuation mark in the human story. That was an extinction level event that occurred in geological terms literally yesterday. And lo and behold, right at the end of the Younger Dryas, 11,600 years ago, suddenly appears all the signs of civilization. All archaeologists don't dispute that. Gobekli Tepe is a very civilized site, and it's 11,600 years old. So really where I'm differing from archaeology is I'm saying I think what we're looking at is the rediscovery or the reinvention of civilization then, not that it was just invented out of whole cloth 11,600 years ago. There's a background to a site like Gobekli Tepe. You can't create a sophisticated, complex site with megaliths weighing 20 tons and more, and with perfect astronomical alignments. You can't do that without a lot of practice and experience, and we don't see the background to that practice and experience. I think the background is a lost civilization.
Was Gobekli Tepe a reboot center, do you think? In other
Oh yeah,
words,
that's absolutely what I think Gobekli Tepe was. And not only Gobekli Tepe, but also Karahan Tepe, which I had the privilege of going to in November 2020, and indeed had visited several times before. There's about a dozen sites around Gobekli Tepe which are in the process of radically rewriting human history. And archaeologists should be careful about what they say about our past while all this excavation remains to be done. Because I think those areas have got a lot to teach us about our past. And I think Gobekli Tepe in particular was a kind of time capsule. If you ask me what I'm looking for, I'm also looking for the Hall of Records. And it may be that Gobekli Tepe is that Hall of Records, a place where I think that the ancients sought a number of ways to pass knowledge down to the future. A belt and braces approach. One archive of written documents would not be enough. You might not even be sure that the writing could be deciphered 10 or 12,000 years in the future. What you want is multiple ways of encoding information. That's why the great myths from around the world that incorporate precise astronomical information are of great interest to me. Information about a hard to observe phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes is encoded in myths and traditions from all around the world. That's one kind of Hall of Records. Another kind of Hall of Records might be a physical location where objects and artifacts from the past were hidden away and preserved. And Gobekli Tepe feels a bit like that, because it was so carefully hidden that it remained hidden for more than 10,000 years, and until Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute considered the implications of some bits of finely worked stone that were sticking out of the side of the hill, decided to excavate, and found that actually they were dealing with a site that was nearly 12,000 years old. Most of Gobekli Tepe is still underground. 90% of the site is still underground. It's been surveyed with ground penetrating radar, but it hasn't been excavated.
Why are
I'd
they
love
taking
to.
so long? Why is it? I mean, Schmidt's
Well,
been
Klaus Schmidt passed away in 2014.
right.
The new team who are working at Gobekli Tepe now are not, in my opinion, the sharpest tools in the box. But the plain fact is that there's archaeology does have a point. Archaeologists don't want to completely excavate any site because they want to leave something for the future when perhaps technology and resources are better than they are today.
Oh,
So I get that. I get the need not to. Once you excavate, you're destroying in a way, and I get the need not to destroy. But I feel more work needs to be done at Gobekli Tepe, and I hope it will be.
as we conclude, Graham, who were the people that built Gobekli Tepe? I mean, the revisionists. I mean, we get people saying that the Denisovans were the people who built and were the teachers of Gobekli Tepe, but I don't know if we have any proof of that.
Well, the people who built Gobekli Tepe, judging from the skeletal remains that have been found there, were anatomically modern humans, and they were hunter-gatherers. This is something else that is important to be, and this is part of the mystery of Gobekli Tepe, because when the first stones are laid at Gobekli Tepe, roughly 12,800 years ago, when the first stones are laid, everybody there are hunter-gatherers. But when the site is completed, they're all agriculturalists. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The date that the first stones were laid at Gobekli Tepe was 11,600 years ago, the end of the Younger Dryas.
Mhm.
The Younger Dryas begins 12,800 years ago. It ends 11,600 years ago. That's the date that Plato gives us for the submergence of Atlantis. He tells us that it was submerged 9,000 years before the visit of Solon to Egypt. That visit took place in 600 BC. So he's telling us Atlantis was submerged in 9,600 BC, 11,600 years ago. That's the same date as Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe then runs for 1,000 years. At the beginning of that 1,000-year period, everybody there are hunter-gatherers. At the end of that 1,000-year period, everybody there are agriculturalists. It's as though the site came first and the agriculture came second, which is the exact opposite of the model that archaeology has worked with up till now, where they say you needed to have a stable agricultural economy before you could put together a big site like Gobekli Tepe. Looked like it worked the other way around, and I think it was a Kickstarter. I think that site was used to mobilize and organize hunter-gatherers and to put them on another path, and that path is the path that we call civilization.
But that's in the Middle East. Do we see a Gobekli Tepe version in South America?
Keep looking in the Amazon.
Oh, yeah, right.
Looking in the Amazon. The search has just started. There's still
Okay.
5.5 million square miles of land in the Amazon that's not been studied by archaeologists at all. Keep looking in the Amazon. That's one of the very likely places to find your Gobekli Tepe style.
I mean, if the world was in such a poor shape following this terminating event, you would think that Gobekli Tepe is just one of perhaps many reboots. Yeah,
I believe it is one of many, and that's what world mythology attests to, that there was a global civilizing endeavor, that the survivors of a global cataclysm spread out around the world and tried to reinitiate civilization. And this happened in different ways in every place they went to, because the local cultures that they found themselves amongst were different. So naturally, the paths diverged, but they have a common core. That common core can be found in geometry, it can be found in the astronomy of these sites, very sophisticated, very advanced knowledge, and it can be found in a global spiritual system, which is to do with the issue of life after death and what happens to us when we die, and its connection to certain kinds of monuments such as pyramids. It cannot be an accident that the same essential set of ideas about the afterlife journey of the soul are found all around the world. This goes back to a shared legacy of a teaching, I believe, from the survivors of a lost civilization.
wonderful. Hey, it's been great having you on the program again. I want to mention you have an announcement. You have a revised extended edition of Visionary. I guess it's coming out.
Yeah, so back in 2005, I normally write about the possibility of a lost civilization, and that's what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
I took a detour for some years of my life, and I got very interested in psychedelics and the mystery of consciousness, and the whole problem of cave art and the incredible art that is done by shamans in the Amazon under the influence of ayahuasca. And I wrote a book about this, which was published in 2005, called Supernatural Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind. And my US publishers are now bringing out a new edition of this book. It's going to be published on the 4th of April, 2022, under the new title Visionary, which more accurately represents the contents of the book. There's bonus material in the book, and 8 chapters that were withheld from the paperback edition of the US edition have been restored to the book. So this is the definitive edition of my book, Supernatural. And what I'm particularly happy about is that the old audiobook is being consigned to nothingness, and I am recording the new audiobook. I'm narrating the previous audiobook of Supernatural was recorded by a third party. I don't know who he was, and God bless him, but I prefer to read my own, to narrate my own books. And I've done that with Fingerprints of the Gods. I've done it with Magicians of the Gods. I've done it with America Before, and I'm about to sit down next week and start recording Visionary.
Okay.
So that'll be out on the 4th of April.
Okay, we should also mention that you are promoting this. It's you can pre-order it now. I'll put the link on my Facebook page, and you're giving a taste of it with a 24-page sampler of a chapter.
That's right. We've included chapter 19 in there as a free-to-read chapter, so that people can get a sense of what this book is about.
So everyone listening, that free chapter will be available on Earth Ancients Facebook, as well as the international page. And I may sprinkle it to a few other sites just so you get a taste of it. And I guess it's coming out again. And when's the audio book going to be ready? In April?
On the 4th of April as well. Yeah.
4th of April as well. Graham, fantastic. Always great to connect with you. Let's hope that 2022 is a little bit brighter and that they open the border so we can travel a little bit more. I got to say this about you. I met you a couple of years ago in San Francisco at the New Living. The whole conference industry has taken it on the chin. And
I'm afraid it has. Yeah.
I can't imagine. You probably have been reduced to 1 or 2 talks in the last 12 months at least.
I really, when it comes to giving presentations, I really like giving those presentations in front of a real audience. I don't like virtual online presentations. You don't get that. You don't get that resonance.
The energy.
You just don't get that energy. So I've tried to avoid, as far as possible, online presentations. Like to get back to some real connection,
Well, I'm glad you graced us with your presence on this one. So, hey,
well, this is a one-to-one conversation, so it works out. But it works out nicely online. But standing there online and giving a presentation to an audience that you can't see or connect with is a different matter. I prefer not to do that.
That's a bit of a challenge. All right, hey, good talking with you, and have a great 2022.
Same to you, Cliff. Keep well.